History is such an important field for all of us today and every day. And we need to understand the past to go ahead in the future. Today with me, I have an interesting book with a long title. And the author of the book is Sharmila Pais E. Martins. Welcome, Sharmila, to the program.
Thank you, Frederick.
The name of your book is The Encounter with the Ballot in Colonial Goa, 1821 to 1961, a historical and analytical perspective. For short, The Encounter. Yes. And basically, we are talking about this colonial elections in Goa.
True.
I liked your book a lot because it says things which we were not aware of. For instance?
First and foremost, thank you once again for giving me this opportunity.
No formalities, but it's fine. You're welcome. And I think your work is important, yeah.
To interact with you. There were a lot of new chapters which I have included in this book. For instance, if you have a look at the second chapter, it's on franchise. It's a work that no author or a researcher has worked on previously. In the past, there have been writers in Portuguese as well as English who have chronicled elections, especially the parliamentary elections. But here, I bring something new where I talk on the franchise, the rules of franchise governing elections, which nobody has done. Apart from there, I have analyzed it, giving reasons why changes occurred in Portugal and the overseas colonies. So it's not merely a narrative in that sense. There are reasons explaining why events occurred and the outcomes from Portugal to Portuguese India.
Of course, it's packed with facts.
Yes.
But it's also packed with explanations and conclusions and interpretations of these facts. One thing I liked a lot is that you disabuse us of the notion that colonial elections were touching only very few people in the state, in the region, in Goa, in Estado de India, whatever it was called. You also remind us that the politics of those times were quite like the politics of today, in certain ways, and in certain ways they were different. It was not adult franchise. Women were not given the vote as yet. There's no denying that.
Yes, very much true.
Yeah, but tell us about the participation in the electoral process in this period, 1821 to 1961.
See, there was no uniform trajectory. If you try to analyze from 1822 to 1961, I can identify several phases. And I think it's very natural to the times. It was in keeping with the times of Europe and how elections function there. To begin with, in 1822, elections in Iberia or the rest of Europe, they were carried out through phased voting. In the sense, there were no direct elections. And you see the same procedure in Goa from 1822 to, say, 1851. So elections may be called as indirect in nature.
Indirect how?
Indirect, because they were phased voting process. You would have one stage of electors voting another lot and the second lot voting the members of the parliament. So this is how it was carried out. And after 1852, you see another phase altogether. How do you explain this? Now, this was in the context of the changes taking place in Portugal, where there was a change of guard, a more liberal government came to power. And it had its repercussions in Portugal and simultaneously the electoral process in Goa. So from 1852, elections ceased to be indirect and they became direct in nature, in the sense that a voter, an eligible voter, could directly participate in the electoral process, which was not before.
That's a very important point you're making. You're saying that Goa's history cannot be seen in isolation. The changes in Europe are affecting us.
Yes.
And very often we talk as if, whatever happened in Goa had no connection to the rest of the world. So I think that's an important point. Also, the dates you took, 1821 to 1961.
Yes.
1961, for obvious
Yes.
reasons, that was when the Portuguese state ended. But 1821 was when the first elections were held, 1820.
No, not 1821. Elections were announced in 1821, but the final process was complete in January 1822. So we say that it became effective from 1822, although the process started earlier. So from 1822 to 1961, in between there were some phases of respite. There was a kind of a pause for various political reasons, though.
Almost exactly 200 years back, no?
Yes, exactly.
When the book was being released a few months back in Panjim during the pandemic.
Yes, October 2nd to be precise.
I see.
And the first election was concluded. I would say that I would use the word concluded because it was concluded in January 1822. So exactly 2 years, 2 centuries before.
The other point, people think we accept that colonial rule was touching very few people, a very tiny segment. You're saying that it was not just Catholics who were voting, it was others also who got the vote on other grounds?
Yes, on grounds of eligibility.
Like?
In fact, this is something that I would like to challenge and put forth very forthrightly, because earlier researchers and historians from Goa and maybe other parts of different parts of the world have stated forcefully that elections were meant only for the Catholics. There are some historians who have even made statements or who have gone on record to state that Hindus were allowed to vote only in 1910, which is absolutely not correct. And I say this with evidence which I have found from the registers, electoral registers in Portugal. The first election was held in 1822. Thereafter, the second one in 1827. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find records for 1822 and 1827. But from 1836, there's clear-cut evidence to prove that Hindus qualified in the elections. Their names figure in the registers as voters and as candidates who could have participated. Whether they participated, that's another thing. But parochial registers, provincial registers do make a mention of candidates, Hindus as well as Catholics. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find names of Muslims, and perhaps my focus then was not really looking for Muslim voters. That's something that I need to maybe work on in the future. But yes, after 1836, there's clear evidence to prove otherwise.
Of course, not all Catholics could vote even, and not all Hindus could vote, because there was a criteria of 5 or 6 other filters, including education and what else? Education.
So there were these people who voted, or the eligible voters. They were called as active citizens of the state. They had to possess requisites of taxation, education, or you could be a head of the family, or you could be the highest contributor to the taxes. A male, definitely. Ladies did not get to vote, although from 1933 there were efforts in Portugal to enfranchise voters, but it did not happen in Goa. So there were, as you say, a lot of filters. And if you qualified, if you were a taxpayer, irrespective of who you were, what social category you belonged to, you were given the right to vote.
What I liked about your book and your research is that you took a lot of trouble to collate the facts from all over the place. It's not like, second-hand stuff and things like that. You've been to the archives. Would you like to describe that process? I
have been to the Goa State Archive. I've spent nearly, say, 3 to 4 months there, because I was on study leave for 2 years, and that gave me an ample opportunity to work in the archives, which I think for a researcher of history is very, very essential, because you get original documents. They are documents from the government perspective, but which are also required. Apart from working in the Goa archives, I've exhausted all the resources in all the libraries, repositories of learning in Goa. You name them and they have all been visited. Besides that, I've spent a month in Lisbon. in the parliamentary archive, which was a very enriching experience. Initially, I didn't want to go visit Lisbon because it was a very unnerving experience.
First time,
first time, and I traveled alone. I didn't want to travel alone, to be very, very frank. In fact, I had informed my guide that I would not be traveling, but somehow it sang on to me and I did travel. It was a very enriching experience because more than the Goa archives, I was able to gather evidence from all the constituencies of Goa, from every village in Portugal. There are boxes, caixas as they are called, and they provide evidence of your social status, your economic status, your qualifications, if you were a head of the family, your religious background. You could write in the Roman script. You can see their signatures either in the Roman script or the Devanagari script. Especially in the New Conquest, voters from the New Conquest, they sign in the Devanagari script. They would mention their qualifications, the taxes that they paid. So that decided their economic and financial standing. So it was a kind of a revelation to me, and a lot of evidence available to prove and disprove a lot of facts which were placed earlier.
And the Portuguese are very good record keepers. Are they also generous in sharing?
They are very generous, and I think it's also the climatic conditions which help them to maintain their records in a better state compared to Goa.
It might be the wrong thing to say, but probably they have a better sense of history also, for better or for worse.
Probably I am.
Whatever.
Probably it may be true as you say, but I think one of the reasons is here, when you see even in the Goa archives, you see a lot of these documents, in tatters. I don't know whether it's the climatic conditions, but I think that also could be a factor. Climatic conditions in Portugal are also better. They are very generous. In fact, I sought evidence in some of the archives there, and they went out of their way. I didn't even have to pay a single penny, although I was actually required to. So they are very helpful when it comes to research, and I know that the government also encourages, they encourage scholarships where a scholar of history research can devote exclusive time on research. You don't really have to bifurcate your time and dedicate to some other work.
And of course, this work resulted in your PhD, which was in the year?
I got my degree in 2018.
This is off the point. I'm very impressed by what young Goan women researchers can achieve once they reach this level of education. I'm not saying that they are not achieving at other levels, but once they reach this level, especially women, in spite of having family and work and obligations and all that, they achieve quite a lot. And I'm not only talking about you, but I've also encountered the work of Reina Sequeira on salt in these coastal areas of Goa, and Beulah Pereira on the social role of alcohol in Goa. And these are not easy subjects to write on, but in spite of that, any comment on the Goan woman researcher of today?
I think you have to have a vision for yourself. You have to dream that you want to achieve a goal and not stay put in bed with that dream, but work towards it.
And believe in it?
Yes, believe in it, and you have to make time. Now, as I mentioned to you earlier, I had this leave of 2 years sanctioned by the governments, which enabled me, and it really helps to focus, because otherwise I'm an educator, and there's a lot
busy.
of
life is busy.
Life is very busy. You would understand it, but this gave me respite to focus on my work. But apart from there, that is something that I wanted to do for a very long time. Since my post-graduation, I thought I would venture into research, but it did not come. I had to wait for quite many years for whatever personal reasons. But I visioned that I would be doing research. So first thing that you need to do is either you want it or you don't want it for yourself. You have to have a vision and work towards your goal. And as you mentioned, the names of women whose work I have read, and very interesting results, products that they have come up with.
Whom I know, there would be others also. Yeah.
Yes, there will be many more. So you have to have a desire within yourself to make it effective.
In case you're just joining us, we are talking to Dr. Sharmila Pais E. Martins, who's done this interesting book called The Encounter, which talks about elections in colonial Goa. and she is associate professor and head of the Department of History of St. Xavier's College. It's a rotational post in that sense, and at the moment she is the HOD, head of department. And Dr. Sharmila, tell us about what are the fields which you feel, first of all, before that, are we doing enough to understand our history in Goa?
I don't think so. We need to do a lot more. There is so much, a vast ocean of matter or areas that could be explored. And I would call upon young researchers, young historians, students of history or even literature to think along lines of research. A lot of matter is available, resources are available in the Goa archives and other institutes also. So one needs to have human resources rather.
But Sharmila, the bottleneck seems to be the lack of guides at this point in Goa, no? Maybe it's a question that we cannot answer today.
I think at the moment there are at least 2-3 guides at Goa University. I know that some of my students who have taken up research. But if that is an impediment, I think if one has the willpower, you can go outside the state. One can apply for, ask for guides across the state.
Maybe things will improve in Goa
perhaps.
Because now the PhD...
Yes, perhaps, and maybe you have the new recruits at Goa University. Once they qualify to be guides, I think there'll be more spaces open for students of history to take up research.
To shift from this to another dramatically different subject, you're the daughter of the late Epitacio Pais. To most people in the state, it may not mean much. To the elders, Portuguese speaking, they know the name. He was a great short story writer.
Yes, true.
Tell us about him. Just to interrupt, I came to know about him just when he passed away, around that period. And there were these foreign scholars who were searching around for him. And he was unwell in that phase. So I think, he was not... But his short stories have been rated very high. And some have got translated by people like Paul Melo Castro and all.
In English. And
what do you remember of your dad?
He published his first work even before I was born. And he got into research in the 1960s and late 1950s. So that is a phase of his life that we are unaware of, because we were not even born then. And the first thing that I remember about...
This is Bati?
This is Bati. The first thing that I remember seeing a collection of his stories in his bookshelf. He has a bookshelf with numerous books. So that's the first thing I remember about his book. And nothing beyond that. But I've always seen him sitting at his desk, writing and reading. He was an avid reader and he wrote quite a lot. Somehow or unfortunately, I was quite young then, maybe in college, and didn't really show as much interest as I would have now to find out what he was writing. But he was very much interested in writing short stories, contemporary stories in the background of his times, the political changes in Goa and other parts of the world. So you see a lot of reality in his work. And believe me, Frederick, for a very long time, I did not realize the worth of my father, because...
That's true with all of us in a sense, no?
Yes. Because first and foremost, they were written in Portuguese, and I did not grow up studying Portuguese. We studied English.
But you spoke at home?
Yes, we spoke at home. What was required to communicate and understand, not the literary kind, but his language is very deep. So, despite my knowledge of Portuguese, when I try to even read his work, it's rather complex. So, it's when a lot of contemporary writers like Paul Melo Castro and others who try to research, and they found a value and how they have estimated his work, that I realized his worth. But I must share with you, after say maybe about now it's nearly over a decade that he has passed away, but maybe when say about 8 years before he died, he had a manuscript which he wanted to get it published. And somehow during his lifetime it didn't happen, unfortunately, and we feel very sad. I don't have answers to tell you why it didn't happen.
Publishing was tough in Goa in those days. Now it has become a bit easier.
And I think we didn't have as much as exposure into publishing. I didn't know anything about publishing till I got into this work of mine.
No, but also see these foreign scholars, they are like a mirror who understand things
Yes.
which we don't understand.
Yes.
No? So they will say like Epitacio Pais is good, and then we wake up to it, So that's part of the process, and the internet only makes all this easier, no?
Yeah. So it is then that my brother thought of working on it, publishing without really taking any external help. And fortunately, Paul Mel Castro,
You're talking about his novel,
yes, Priyamar,
Priyamar, which means Beyond the Sea,
The Rising Tide.
The Rising Tide. Sorry.
So it was Paul Mel Castro who helped us to edit, and you published it for us.
Yeah, but
in a matter of few months.
Even the Brazilians, Professor Helder Garmes.
Yes.
He would say things like, we came across a word and we were wondering whether it was right, and then we found it was in a dictionary and it was right. So like, that was the value of him, which we didn't even understand. But to shift tracks again, tell us about what are the topics on the top of your head which you feel young historians should be looking at in Goa today. If I had to ask you for a list of 5, okay, I want to do my PhD, give me a list of 5 topics.
It would also, yes, I will list a few, Frederick, because I'm open to sharing, and I want young students and researchers, irrespective of whether they have been my students or from any other institution, to benefit from this. But it also depends on their area of interest. Now, my work has largely been a political work. So, I would think that some of the chapters that I have written, not the parliament election because that has been exhaustively covered, but say the local elections, parochial elections, or municipal elections, or elections to the Legislative Assembly can be worked on a larger scale. Because here they constitute a chapter, maybe a chapter of 50 pages. So one can have a whole
book.
Yes,
a full thesis.
You can probably, municipality of Goa offers a great scope for research. And what actually would help a researcher is the knowledge of Portuguese. That greatly helps a researcher.
True.
So what I see, the modern creed of researchers trying to research after 1961 because of the lack of knowledge of Portuguese. But I don't think that should be an impediment, because if you have the willpower, you can take courses. There are so many Portuguese institutes based in Goa who offer courses. You can refer to secondary sources in English that would give you a background, and thereafter go to the archives.
And in a word, when are you going to become a guide, just in case any of our listeners want to know? I know it's a long process and it's an embarrassing question because it's not in your hands and it takes time and there are formalities to go through. You can't do it overnight. Whatever. You don't have to give me an answer, just a question. Hopefully soon. That's the answer.
I'm not too sure, because there are rules and regulations that are demanded which are not within our
it's
bounds.
Tough. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's tough.
Yeah.
It's not tough. You have to
go through the
procedure. You have to get your publications in various accepted journals, which wasn't there maybe till say a few years back.
Okay.
The rules were totally different.
Okay.
So by the previous standards, demands of the previous regime, I would have qualified.
I see.
Because I have so many years of service. But now in the recent past,
things have got tougher.
Yes, past maybe 2-3 years, things have, I wouldn't say got tougher, they are more challenging.
Whatever.
So they, require you to publish in certain standard acceptable journals, which have been identified. So
Scopus
maybe, yes, so if I, not that, I'm forcefully clamoring for it.
I understand fully what you're saying. Our friend, Dr. Celsa Pinto, your friend, my friend, has made this point that very few people have studied Goa after the 1750s, and you are one of them.
Yes.
Comment?
I particularly took interest in the 19th century. This my period of study is the 19th century, because I had worked on a minor research project a couple of years, maybe more than a couple of years back, which gave me an exposure to the 19th century political scenario. Apart from politics, I was made abreast of society, education, and economy, like transportation. So 19th century offers you so much, because it's a watershed century. You have a change. You have the change of guard from absolute monarchy to liberalism, a liberal constitutional monarchy, which changes the whole political scenario, and along with the change, along with a liberalism setting in, devolution of power setting in, the outcome is totally different. So the 19th century in particular has so much to offer. And it is in the context of this work that I came across, I was acquainted with rather the electoral process that made me to take a deep into the ocean.
Interesting. And as a closing thought, I'd just like to remind the listener something from Dr. Sharmila's work. How much, the more we change, the more things remain the same. So what I liked was one point you made in your book where you said that the power came from the king to the local parties in Portugal, and then from there on to the local elites. Today you find something similar in a slightly different sense.
Yes, very much. The
panchayats support the local MLAs, the MLAs support the parties in Delhi, and then
fully agree with you. Power emanates from the top and filters down to the grassroots level.
And vice versa, both ways.
So like in history, we would, call it history repeating itself, not replicating, but repeating itself in a different form. But you see so many similarities. The person at the helm of affairs would definitely influence electoral outcomes at the local level, at the provincial level, or say the overseas provinces. So that is what happened. If there was a liberal party at the helm of affairs, you would see a liberal government, the liberals in Goa
taking over.
The outcomes were very positive. And if there was an absolute government, things would be a little different over here, because most of the Goan representatives, they were supporters of the liberal regime. So definitely it's something to be acknowledged, how politics works, that the reality is
such a fascinating book, and as you have rightly pointed out, it touches not only on the history of Goa, but on the politics, on the culture, on the sociology, on many aspects of Goa. There's a lot of work that has gone into this book. And the other thing is that, it looks like a serious work, a PhD thesis, but if anyone is interested in reading it, that's when all the nuggets come out. Dr. Sharmila, I want to end by thanking you so much, because we've run out of time. We can discuss much more on this, but we've run out of time. And I want to thank you for doing this work, for putting it forward, for being so determined in making sure it comes out on time. Okay, and all the best, and thank you
to Frederick, Noronha. You have been very supportive. I've known you for quite many years, and you are very encouraging. Thanks a lot. Pleasure interacting with you.